Hi, my name's Yuko Ishigaya and I'm the Youth Activities Lead at Canterbury Bankstown Council. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Darra people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording this podcast today. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all First Nations people listening. I came to Australia from Japan 30 years ago, and I'm deeply grateful for the way this land and its people have accepted and welcomed me here. It is a privilege to work on the land that has supported the Darra people for countless generations and to be part of a community enriched by the many cultures that come together here. I am humbled by the connections and stories we share, and I am committed to continually learning and contributing to the respect and preservation of this area. Thank you for joining us on this journey on this podcast and celebrate the diversity that makes Canterbury Bankstown so vibrant.
Hi, I'm James, local resident of Canterbury Bankstown.
And I'm Anna, Community Development Worker in Canterbury Bankstown.
Canterbury Bankstown is rich in diversity, from the languages spoken, countries of birth, journeys to CBCity, along with the various identities, abilities, faiths practiced, achievements, and multi-generations.
Together, we'll be interviewing a range of community members from Canterbury Bankstown. We'll be amplifying diverse voices from across the CBCity to give you an insight into other cultures. Together, we're working to create a great CBCity where we all belong, feel welcome, safe, and embrace our differences. This is Voices of CBCity. Uncle Harry was born and grew up in Charters Towers, Queensland, and is a descendant of the Gudjala tribal group. Uncle Harry enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force in 1966 after being inspired by his uncles and aunties who'd previously served in the Defence Force. After serving for 23 years throughout Australia, the US and Malaysia, he applied for discharge in 1989 and then continued to work in the defence industry for 11 years. Before retiring, Uncle Harry worked with the Department of Families, Housing Community Services and Indigenous Affairs in the Sydney Indigenous Coordination Centre. Uncle Harry has performed many roles within the local community, such as chairperson of the Canterbury Bankstown City Council Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Committee, and also the Coloured Diggers Projects and numerous other committees. Uncle Harry has also received many awards over the years, and some of them include the British Empire Medal in 1980, and that's an award that's given by the King and Queen to recognise outstanding civil and military service, as well as a member of the Order of Australia in 2023 and Bankstown Citizen of the Year in 2014. Welcome, Uncle Harry. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Uncle Harry, I wanted to start at the start, which is you being born in Charters Towers, Queensland. Can you tell me a little bit about your early life, your home life, your family?
Yeah, being born in Charters Towers was something different in its own way, particularly our connection with family. My mother come from a family of 10 and my father come from a family of 11. So between the Allie family and my mother's maiden name was Santo, and the aunties and cousins that we had connections with was indeed great, and certainly making you feel loved and wanted in many ways.
Did many of those relatives live close by?
They all lived in Charters Towers. The only worrying thing was that if you were put under the Aboriginal Protection Act, which was a worrying thing, which meant that you were in many cases sent to Palm Island. There was other situations where if you had TB, you were sent to Phantom Island and things like that. So they had, for the Aboriginal people particularly, they had many things to where you were put away in some way. If you're under the Aboriginal Protection Act, you were sent out on cattle station, and we only come into town twice a year, which was show time in June and Christmas time for a couple of weeks. And if and when that you did come in, you collected your tent from the police station and went and put it up on the hill, which was just up the road from where we lived. So particularly my mother and father weren't under the Act, and my mother particularly ensured and took meals to them up on the hill till they got their rations, and to make sure that they had a smooth transition and to enjoy their time while they were in town before they went back out into the bush.
So, Uncle Harry, you had relatives that were under the Aboriginal Protection Act, yeah.
I did. I had many that were under the Act, and particularly my mother and her sister were the only one that weren't, because it was a station that they were working on, they weren't put under the Act. So that was indeed enlightening in itself.
Mm. And with the Protection Act, what did it take to be put under the Protection Act? Like with your relatives, for example, what were some of the reasons that they were put under the Protection Act and others weren't?
The protection of police and the police were always sort of watching you, and particularly if from their perspective that you weren't sort of doing the right things in the community, then you were taken away. I spent many a time in a cupboard because of when, thank goodness, that the police truck had to change gears coming out of the corner. So we immediately, when we were too small, we put in cupboards.
Mm-hmm.
And when later on, when we could run, we run into the bush, which around our house in Manor Street, there was a lot of big trees, and we were fortunate enough to hide, and we could look out of the bushes and watch what the police. But my mother particularly would not. Would always meet people at the gate and not let anybody come in the front gate until she was sort of happy that they were well, sort of could be received in the right way.
So could your mum, for example, could an adult refuse entry onto the property if they wanted to come on the property too?
Well, she believed that she could, but I think if they felt that they would, the police would have pushed her aside. But that was a stance that she took. And in my time of growing up, thank goodness, I never seen that opportunity arise where they did push her aside to go in and search the house.
Uncle Harry, that sounds very unsettling. I suppose, like, as a young boy, did you feel safe at home with your family during that time, or did you feel as though the police could come through the door at any minute?
With where we lived, and particularly up on the hill, where they were all, when they were in town, the police sort of tend to come down and to talk to my mother, who was well known, and particularly to ask an opinion if they'd seen, because there was a big creek down the road from where we lived as well.
Yep.
And particularly people used to go down there for the fish. And so my mother where we lived, and my grandmother on my father's side also lived next door, and their family, my uncles and aunties, grew up there as well. And so we were sort of identities, the Allie family and the Sandos families, in our own way, and to work with the authorities, and particularly later on, which was worrying, when TB was a worrying thing, and you were put into isolation and things like that. So it was all about to ensure that your community was looked after in the best possible way, as well as sorry business, that we come together and to make sure that they were laid to rest in the most respectful way. And there was things about not having money, and to make sure that they could be sort of laid to rest in the proper way.
So, Uncle Harry, I understand you had a grandfather that originated from, is it called the Malacca Straits in Malaysia?
Yeah, that's my grandfather, my father's father, and we never did much history tracking on him, but we tried to track down my grandmother of my father, or my mother's for my father, who was on the birth certificate said that she was where she was born, and for her to travel to across to where to end up in. We heard that she come on the back of a buggy into servitude into Sardis Towers, and what they did is they married quickly to sort of get out of, so that they had their best possible way, and how she met her grandfather Harry Allie. But they built a house at Blackjack, which was the gold mining area, and then finally, him being a good worker with the way he was, they were able to buy a house in Manor Street, Charters Towers, which was like a castle in itself in those days, and with people not having much money. And that also helped my father. Also had a good worker. He worked on cattle stations, but then he ended up being working in the railway as a fettler. But he was always a good worker, and he was away most of the week and come home Fridays, had the weekend and went back Sundays. But that's how we built our house. He built our house next door to my grandmother. So we grew up next door to them in Manor Street, Charters Towers. So they said, Harold Alley, you live in Manor Street. We expect you to have the manners accordingly in line with the street names.
So did you find out much about the cultural heritage of the grandfather that came from?
No, I haven't, but now that you've sort of reminded me again, and if I've got more time, I'll start sort of going into Google and trying to see if I can regather something. And my sister is very good because she worked for many years at James Cook University. She's in Townsville, and my brother is still with me, but he works in Aboriginal health in Townsville. So on the health side, I check with him, and together, they're still involved with Charters Towers and with Jupiter Mossman organisations and helping the younger generation to identify who they are and to keep moving forward, and that they've got the best opportunities and to do that.
Yeah, and on your mother's side, you had a great grandfather that came from Vanuatu. Is that right?
Yeah, the Santo side is very lengthy, but that's what that was in those days. They had to have connection. There was mixed marriages, particularly with the Aboriginal women. And there's a history there with Granny Santa and her maiden name and how she... But because they're all under the Act, they worked on stations for so long, and that's what they did. But particularly the two daughters that weren't under... They ensured that they were looked after when they come to town, and particularly to help them spend their a lot of funding that they got for their clothing and updated clothing, and so that they were looking good and all that sort of thing. Because the eyes were always upon you, yeah.
Going back to that first job and your education, I understand you finished up at school at around 14. Can you tell us why you decided to leave school at about that age, and what were the circumstances around that?
Oh, money was always very short, and even though my father was working, and because the compulsory thing, my first wage was £4.8 and threepence, and it broke my heart to pay £2 for my thing to my mother for my...
Wow, that's steep.
So, but that's the way it was, and I was an ice cream person, so going out of... when I was a telegram boy, I'd go up to the ice cream shop on the corner and get my ice cream, and if it was so good, I might even sneak back and get another one. But that's what you did at 14, and the other thing to sort of keep the mind busy, I lived in the pool room, so
Uh-huh.
so that's where you spent a lot of time. So until you become of age to go down the pub and have a beer, which was 21 in Queensland at that time.
At that time, yeah. So, Uncle Harry, it's from what I can tell, did you work as a telegram boy, night exchange, postman, linesman?
When I was looking for a job, my mother wouldn't let me go and work on the station because of them only coming into town and missing out on many things. And so I walked through all the shops in Gill Street, Charterstown, and nobody would want to employ me. But there was a pastry cook. He'd just opened up a business. He was ex-airforce, and he employed me.
Mm-hmm.
So the only trouble with that, you had to start work at 4 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
and I liked my beauty sleep, and but I did it, but what happened? When I was at school, I stayed home from school one day, and the head teacher come out, and he said to me, "Mother, get him to sit for the post office exam."
Okay.
So not being very bright, I came seventh out of eighth.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, when I sort of had enough of being on the pastry cooks, I'd step, and next minute they said, "You want to start at the post office?"
Right.
So fate being fate, I ended up being employed as a telegram boy, which I was so proud of, and getting a flash uniform. And but I had to smile to myself after I'd been employed there, is that in the post office, a woman caused a big stink in the post office.
Why?
And she wanted to know why Harry Allie had been employed before her son. And I still remember the postmaster's name to this day, Joe Williams. And he said, "Well, Harold comes seventh and your son come eighth." So that was the first bit of equality where they didn't employ somebody before me. So
Yes.
that's the way life was.
And do you think her rationale at the time was, she was white Australian, and so her son should have taken precedent over yourself? Right.
So the eyes were upon you in their own ways, and particularly if they thought that the Aboriginal side or the Indigenous side was getting something before them, sort of thing, yeah. But each for themselves, yes, when everybody's looking after their own ways.
What did it mean to you to have that job at the time? Like how much did it mean to, I suppose, after being neglected by so many different places, after finally getting the telegram position?
Oh, the biggest thing was you knew you're going to get pay every fortnight. And to know that pay, and you weren't in a line to sort of go and get it. And to know that the pay was coming every fortnight, rail, hail or shine, and you could plan things, and you could go for a holiday or put it in a milk tin somewhere, and or put it in the bank as long as you drew it out by 3 o'clock Friday, because they weren't open Saturdays, or no ATMs.
Just in time for the pub. Actually, would have been too young at the time, but yeah.
So, but yeah, the only trouble is sometimes with getting paid, they knew, some of the locals knew what day it was, and they'd be waiting outside work. Can you give me £2?
And so when you was it 24, you entered the Air Force. What made you decide to take that step? Because you'd been employed for a number of years. You weren't short of work at that point. Yeah.
I used to have to go to Townsville quite a bit, and I was in Air Force because we had Redden Airport in World War II. It was a big airfield for the Americans. But I just sort of liked watching the aircraft, and I saved up all my money to fly from Charters Towers to Townsville in a DC-3, which was the airlines at the time.
Right.
and I used to stand on the fence at Garbett and watching planes taking off and landing.
Ah.
And then when I went into town and looked at the recruiting centre, then I walked up and asked them about sort of enlisting, and I thought I'd enlist as a linesman.
Mm.
But they had no vacancies for the linesman at that time.
Mm.
They said, however, you can come into the logistics side if you wish.
Mm.
So they said, we're ready for our big intake in January, 5th of January, 1966.
Mm.
So that's where I said, okay, I put my hand up. So we had a record enlistment in Townsville on that date. So away we enlisted, and we all went off to Edinburgh.
Mm.
So that's how I come to enlisted in the Air Force.
So
How big of a moment was that for you?
It was the unknown factor, particularly I'd been in the school cadets when I was at school, and the marching and left, right, and don't turn your head and all that. So there was a little bit of awareness of that, and it's the unknown factor. And just you have to have shiny shoes and creases in your trousers and all those sort of things where, because if you weren't complying, then you were penalised accordingly.
That's right.
And I understand you had relatives that were also in the armed forces. Did that have some influence as well?
Oh, looking at the photos at my grandmother's house, and particularly my Uncle Charlie, who served in World War One and World War Two on the left side. Then Uncle Bill Allie, he served in the army. And particularly Auntie Martha, her photo was brought forward because she served in the Women's Land Army. Then I served in the Air Force, and my brother served over 20 years in the army and served in Vietnam and New Guinea. We've lost him. So that's the way it was. And that's my connection with the Air Force, and then to be appointed Indigenous Elder of the Air Force for 12 years and to sort of encourage and sort of help and assist the younger generation who wish to make a career in the Air Force and to see that they're happy in every way.
Yeah, yeah. And you did, was it 23 years in the...
23 years, yes.
Yeah, and that took you to a number of different places.
Yes, I was asked to go to America for the delivery of the F-111s. There was a moment there, particularly with the what was going on in America about on whether I'd be able to go, and but I was selected to go. The thing that did sort of when we flew into Sacramento, and the living in Charters Towers in our early days, we used to always go down the back of the bus anyway, and so that's what I did when I got on the bus in America. And the driver, all I could see was his eyes looking at me going down the back of the bus, and the mateship that I had with the Air Force, there was two mates that had come straight with me and sat down there, and that's what I told about the mateship of serving.
Yeah. So when you're talking about the back of the bus, you're talking about you felt that you need to go to the back of the bus because you were dark-skinned, or am I...
No, it's just an old habit of mine, and it's sort of all the seats in the earlier part of the bus are taken up normally, and so that's why you go down the back of the bus where you don't have to worry about where you're going to sit.
Don't worry, Uncle Harry, the back of the bus is where the cool kids sit.
And you also got to Malaysia and different parts of Australia as well?
Yes, I had postings all over Australia. I went from Sale to Amberley, which is Ipswich, and then from Ipswich to Perth, then from Perth back to Laverton, then from Laverton up to Townsville, then Townsville to Regent's Park, which is a stores depot, and different roles in the Sydney area that I had, and then it was time to sort of leave, and not because I was used to the area. That's why we sort of settled in the area here.
Yeah, but was it in Sale that you met your wife?
I left my beautiful wife, and we've got 55 years up this year.
Mm.
She was serving, but in those days the WAFs, after they were married, had to leave the service. So, but that's what you do, and my two sons were born in Sale as well. So, so they were travelling all around with me as well. And
Yeah.
the thing that worried me was the changing schools as we moved around. So.
Yeah. And did you, the two of you, you and Bev, experience any strange looks or any kind of discrimination being an interracial couple?
Not that was said to us directly. There was nothing that sort of... you tend to live your own life, and particularly the fences, and you drive in and you drive out. The people we are friendly. But as time goes by, people get to know who you are, and it doesn't it's not as noticeable as what it was in the early part,
Yeah.
And particularly the progression of the communities that the younger generations are making, where that's not a bigger issue now. They're probably more worried about whether you're going to make a lot of noise or whether you're going to be having parties and throwing something over the fence.
And going back to one thing you brought up, the mateship in the armed forces, I gather that was a huge thing for you. Like, you played a lot of sport when you were in the armed forces, and you also seem to be, after you've left the Defence Forces, still carrying on that mateship and reaching out to ex-servicemen who are First Nations people. So how important was that mateship to you, and was that one of the big positives of being in the armed forces?
Oh, it's very important mateship, and particularly if you're on your own, because you've got to have a life outside, and that mateship is a social thing in many ways. And if there's children, the children are playing sport or mixing together in their own way, and you've all got a story to tell when you move on and can come together years later. We still have reunions, and there's things and photographs are an important thing. They weren't as easy in the early days, but now people are digging out and getting the old black and white photos and sending this to remind you of what you looked like back, say, 40 years ago.
Yeah. One story that I did read about you that I'd like you to share is about you and your mates when you were in Adelaide, going into a pub at the time, and how that went. Do you know the story I'm referring to?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, particularly when we were in Adelaide, and the unknown factor, and there had been the communities in Adelaide were going through discrimination, and particularly some hotels wouldn't serve Aboriginal people, and maybe there was a reason, I don't know, and particularly the unknown factor. So we used to say to the mates, you shout all the B, and then if I go for my shout and they don't serve me, well, then we can all get out and go to another one. But so we always worked out a way to beat the system if that was the way to do it. But it was that mateship of looking after, caring for me as well, and that's what binds the mateship as well.
That like the importance of that mateship, especially as you would have been traveling so much, building that. Did it feel like you guys were building your own sort of community? Especially because you would have been in so many different countries and places and settings, and you're not quite settling anywhere, especially when you were raising a family. Did you ever have a sense of a community amongst your mates, despite the location?
We always, because we knew what there was, particularly when you moved into the house next door and all you had was big boxes, and you had to go and you couldn't find the jug, and so people tended to bring over a cup of tea and some bickies or something, just to sort of keep you going. But it was those things about where people were caring, and particularly if you couldn't find a hose or something, but little things like that mean something, and that sort of help you sort of settle in quickly. And there's nothing more than frustration if you're sort of not moving forward in a manner quickly. Yeah.
And Uncle Harry, you left the Defence Forces after many years, but you didn't leave without quite a number of medals. I mean, I can't list them all. Oh, I could, but Certificate of Outstanding Service, the British Empire Medal for Meritorious Service, Australian Services Medal, Defence Services Medal, National Medal, Australian Defence Medal, and that's just some of them. Like, what does that mean to you? Like, yeah.
It's indeed an honour to be recognised for my contribution and what I've done. And like everything, you just want the best of the best for what's going on, and particularly for me to look back now and to have served and to have enjoyed what I've served, and particularly to pass on that information to the younger generation, so that if they've got any sort of thinking on where they would like to go as well, and particularly other roles that I might be in as well, like at the Western Sydney University, and particularly to help them, guide them to their journey if they wish to go through university, or particularly here in our Canterbury Bankstown community, that they're aware of what's here as well. And that's where there's people like yourself that have helped me as well pass on that information, and it's all about moving us forward. Yes.
And you've also had a very active life after the armed forces, and as I'd mentioned, a lot of activity. You're on a lot of committees that with Defence Forces, and specifically with First Nations people. Can you tell me a bit about that work specifically, that where you are, as I'd say, reaching out to Aboriginal people that served, and may not feel so connected to them, let's say, mainstream ex-services associations?
It's all about keeping an eye on everybody, and that's why we build up the network, and particularly if they're not travelling too well, to make them aware that there's certain services, and to see that they're not being left behind in any way, and also to come and join, and particularly with me, Chair of the Indigenous Veteran Ceremony at Hyde Park, where we have the service, and to get them to come along and to proudly sort of be there with us, and to show and to be there with the younger generation. And we work with the schools, and to tell them that there's a history that we served as well, alongside our mates, and we went where we were called upon to go, and all that sort of thing. But it's all about equality as well. Equality, that everybody has that opportunity to do and be and what they want to be. Yes.
Yeah. The Air Force did take you to lots of places, but it also brought you into the southwest Sydney region. It took you to Regent's Park, and then eventually you settled in the Bankstown area. But by then you were no longer working in the armed forces, is that right? You'd taken up a position in government. So you had a number of years of other roles as well, and in community.
Probably the biggest thing is when I went to work for ATSIC, and it got me to be involved with the communities here at Bankstown, LGA at that time. And that opened up everything, particularly when I seen the wider organisations that were applying for funding or needed funding, and I sort of, you were able to look at those organisations and to see the and connect with people. So that opens up, that magnifies everything, and that was a great thing for me to help my, first and foremost, with our community here, and to sort of go on from there. But the only trouble now, as time goes by, it's a bit hard. I'll have to get a bigger mirror to practice saying NO, but
Yeah.
that's the trouble at this age. And I keep looking at certain people, see if the wrinkles are flying on the foreheads.
We're looking at a CBCity Council worker there. So for those that don't know, ATSIC is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, yeah. And so you've become very active with Aboriginal community groups in Canterbury Bankstown area. You sit on a number of committees, and you also have played advocacy roles, even like from an early age. Was it yourself, or was it a number of you that would be writing to the Aboriginal Protection Board, or was it to the Queensland government about having some of your relatives come out from under the Aboriginal Protection Act?
In that stage, the politicians weren't there, so you tended to write directly to the organisation, like the Protector of Aboriginals, directly. So, so you had to wait and get responses from those organisations as such. Particularly, that's changed dramatically in today's, and I feel that if you need assistance, your politicians are very sort of representative, and that's what you tend to do a lot more in the modern era as well. But each for its own. We were very fortunate that I used to get tapped on the knuckles if I wasn't writing smoothly and writing good, and but my mother couldn't read and write, and with my father being away, so I used to write the letters, and then when I joined up, and I'd look forward to, before the days of emails and that sort of thing, I used to wait for the post to go up the post office to see if a letter would arrive from home, and I'd look at the handwriting to see, to work out who wrote the letter for Mum. So
Yeah.
but that's the way it was, and you'd have to rob a bank to send a photograph of anything, the old box brownie, and wait 5 days for them to be developed and things like that. So.
And you also have been involved in native title in your area? And
Up in Charters Towers, yeah, we were working alongside another cousin, and to get that recognition, yeah, and it's there, but it's to sort of get the recognition of our people, and so that can be passed on, and but that's where it sometimes was a bit slower because of where it hit south of it down here. We're much more sort of moving forward, yeah.
Okay. And I understand you were there at Parliament House when Kevin Rudd gave the national apology in 2008.
Yeah, the wonderful thing is the organisations that you're in, and the invitations or the emails or the phone calls that come through, and to be there to represent, it was indeed an honour. So with different things, and that's what makes me wonder sometimes where my phone, who's got my mobile number. And
like from all of your lived experience, it sounds like you're leaving behind like an amazing legacy, right? I'm just wondering, like, what would be a message that you would pass on to future First Nations generations moving forward, especially in Bankstown?
The first and foremost thing is that they have a happy life, and particularly if you're happy and go as you're growing up, But with you growing up, there's other things that you need to participate in, whether it's athletics or something, or whether it's basketball, and mixing with other people, and particularly as time goes by, the only thing that worries me if I go down the fish shop, I get tapped on the shoulder and asked what part of India I come from. So, but that's the multicultural thing that we have. But that's how the eyes are upon you. And but the most important thing is that as you're going through, then you can participate, and when you're ready to participate, that you're passed on that information where you can join, and then as you participate, you're asking what you can sort of contribute towards it. But as time goes by, as you're in these committees, the agenda keeps changing, and that's most important, to be at the forefront of that changing agenda.
That's interesting, absolutely. Following on from that, you mentioned earlier that you joined the Air Force at the age of 24, which is roughly how old I am right now. But I think I'm just asking, I suppose, from the perspective of someone in their young 20s, you made this decision which led to such an incredible life after that. In terms of the unknown, what sort of advice would you share in terms of taking that leap of faith?
In my time, because of the national service that was going on, there was a lot of 17 and 18-year-olds that joined. But I'd been out seeing the world when I joined at 24. And I sort of had an older outlook than the ones that I was on rookies with and on the course of my supply course. So it's most important that at the age that you're at, that you can contend and sort of move with what is put in front of you. There's some people that can't handle discipline, told what to do, or stand to attention on the parade ground, or you do this, or you, in the roles that you're in, you can't stay on that particular role. You've got to move on to another role. So you've got to have an amount of flexibility, and that adds to the experience that you go. And as I look back over 23 years, what I did in the roles and the jobs, and to sort of put me where I am today, that just made such a big difference.
Well, there you have it, everyone. Stay disciplined. Very well said.
And flexible.
And flexible.
You mentioned in this oral history project that you were involved in called Early Days, that was put together by a youth service at the time, BIDS, that you had a particular special connection with an uncle of yours called Uncle Sid Santo, because he had a sense of humour. He was a great character. And I don't know Uncle Sid Santo, but I feel that I could see something about you that reflects Uncle Sid Santo.
Oh, Uncle Sid, he had a wonderful sense of humour, and he didn't want to go and work in the stations. So he was a good snooker player. So he used to spend a lot of time up in the billiard room, and we'd be trying the Kelly where you flick the number out, and that's the number you got a pot, and you'd put 2 bob in, which was a lot of money. And if there was 12 blokes playing in it, it was £2, so it was a lot of money to win, and a lot of ice creams for me. And but Uncle Sid was a good boxer, and he went to work for a sort of a showman by the name of Larry Delhunty, and they travelled all out in Western Queensland, and that's what he'd encourage all the communities. He'd go down in the river and where they were sort of living and all that sort of thing, and he was so well known all through the thing. And with me travelling, I used to sort of follow along and catch up with him, and but he would also keep an eye on me as well. So the eyes were upon me as well. But he, like everything, when we lost him young, and that was the sad part. And and he had a great history on the town side, more so than all the uncles and the other aunties, and but they all had a journey and they all had a story on how they coped in different ways. I don't think Uncle Sid was under the Protection Act. I think he was another one, yeah. I'd have to go back and pull out all the history side of things. Talking to you today got me thinking again.
And Uncle Harry, as we said, you've travelled around quite a bit, and you've met lots of different people along the way. How do you think that connecting with people from different cultural or religious or diverse communities, backgrounds, impacts on your view of the world?
Like everything, particularly we've all had a journey. And I think when you're sort of opening it, having a discussion, is you talk about their journey and to be who they are and where they are and why they're here. And that in itself shows an interest that you're sort of here to help each other. And I think it's particularly important here with the amount of nationalities we have here in Canterbury Bankstown. And particularly when we're all sitting here and we all ask how you are and where you come from and how long you've been living here, and we try not to ask you ladies how old you are and different other questions. But we all have a journey and a story, so that's the opening discussion, yes.
What role do you think that like listening has in fostering these sorts of relationships between different backgrounds, especially as we're starting to see the rise of different types of communities as well, especially like the LGBT community? Have you got any examples that you'd like to share?
Well, particularly I'm on a community at the Bankstown Hospital, and particularly representational side, there's so many people then on the committee, and particularly to ensure that people are being looked after from their communities in the hospital, and there's they're being sort of going through quickly, and but it's all about representation in its own way, and particularly you don't sort of go and sit at a committee meeting or a meeting and then just go home and sit on the chair and say nothing. And it's about sharing and particularly talking to each other on and just quietly there might be something that comes up and you say, well, I know where you can go to get help or assistance and to help you move forward. So that's what it's all about, yes. And that's certainly in our community, and particularly the elders, and particularly elders that they're living from fortnight to fortnight. There's some that haven't got that financial backing, and that's what you make sure that they're right. And particularly if we lose somebody, that they're acknowledged, and that we can sort of let them go in the right sort of possible way.
You were mentioning earlier how you would go down to the local fish shop and people would have a few problems, identifying specifically, like, or making those assumptions, I would suppose. What would you suggest would be some ways that we could overcome these biases or assumptions that people might have?
Well, particularly with the White Australia policy, there was no problem. Everybody sort of had a fair skin. But now with particularly with the Indian, the African, with the nationalities that we've come, and we're all looking at each other trying to work out where you come from, and but that's just curiosity in its own way, and it just makes you wonder that they're going all right, but particularly to see them moving through our LGA, but also in town, as you see, how they're mixing with how they're in certain areas, like particularly with the in Canterbury Bankstown with the Lebanese community, there's a much more bigger here because they tend to come to where their group is or where they've got connections.
Yeah.
And you just got to see the amount of shops, particularly in Punchbowl and down that way, and even in Bankstown. But that's the way things go. I'm not too sure about the other suburbs. I don't go much over the north side, but each to their own. And particularly, I think your financial status has a lot to do with where you reside, and particularly with the housing, the way it's escalating, and the younger generation, and you don't want to pay rent every fortnight or month, whatever. So, but each to their own. That's the way it goes.
Mm. Yeah, it was interesting you mentioned that earlier because when people are trying to sort of guess what nationality you are, I often run into that problem quite a lot as well, being from a mixed background. So it is an interesting question to think about. How do we get around it? Yeah.
Well, in the early days, there used to be a sort of when they spoke, it didn't come out like you had it sort of had a slang thing, but the English today is, no matter what country, is so clear, like that's why it's hard to determine what country you come from, and particularly in the migration, with me growing up with Italian and Greek, they always had something where you knew that they were Italian or whatever, or Greek, and to a degree the Vietnamese, when they migrated here as well, there was a time where they took a while to learn English, but that doesn't happen now.
Absolutely.
Uncle Harry, are there some important values or beliefs that you would trace back to your culture, Aboriginal culture, and lived experience that guides you to how you live your life?
Probably we always wanted to trace our descent, where we come from, and particularly the Aboriginal side, and living here and being treated as Aboriginal. So it was always, I could never throw a boomerang too good. It would never seem to return, so I didn't have that knack. But that connection is always there for me, the Aboriginal. More so, I've always been interested in the Torres Strait culture because they come down. I had a lot of connection. There was mixed marriages with them, and particularly listening to their story and how they all come together for us all to be one. But it will never take away that interest and that connection from my Aboriginality side from me, Having a shiny forehead adds to it as well.
And what do you think is misunderstood about the Aboriginal community, and how can others approach it with more empathy?
I think not as much in the modern day era, because everybody sort of has an understanding that we've all come from somewhere. But that wasn't the case in the early days. There was particularly the way the things sort of went, and particularly where people with settlement coming in and not understanding, and they wanted the best of the best, and they understood, like with sort of real estate and things like that. And that's why the Aboriginal communities never had finance or money. So that's why they tended to live in reserves or on the outer part of town where things were cheaper. And in those days they built their houses. My father built our house. Whereas in these days you get everything built. And you make sure you have the money accordingly. So that side of it's gone, thank goodness, yeah.
And Uncle Harry, how do you think that listeners can help build a stronger and more inclusive community in their everyday lives?
Well, it's saved. You have to ask everybody who they are, their name. They haven't got a name tag. And particularly to move forward, you sort of, whether it starts off with hello, how are you? And then the next thing comes up you're thinking to say is, oh, where do you live? And then you keep, so there's a set dialogue on how you open up the conversation. And as you sort of keep talking more and more, and you haven't got around to the muffin yet to eat, you sort of ask a bit more about where they come from and things like that. And but that's how you build up the discussion rate and the journey, and that's a big thing on where we move forward. And the other thing is the networking that we have with emails and with the organisations and the meetings and all those sort of things. But that's the good thing, where we've got good organisers and who you're involved with. So it opens up your connections in a big way.
So community events you see as being very important to help build that connection?
It's particularly if you're feeling unloved and unwanted, and then to come down and somebody at Black Santa walks over and asks you if you want a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, like somebody does, and all those sort of things. But that's what we're keeping an eye on in our own way, that nobody's being left out and things like that. And particularly with the migration coming from rural New South Wales, or not so much Queensland or Victoria, but from Western New South Wales moving into Canterbury Bankstown, we're keeping our eyes and ears out so that we haven't got one of the groups. I think Auntie Lola Simmons still got their things, their event down there, but to sort of make them aware that to go down there and for them to meet to start with, but to get them to connect it into the community is the most important thing.
Yeah. And do you think that Canterbury Bankstown, living here for quite a number of years now, that it's shaped your identity in a little way?
I would like to see more participation. Just to give you an example, me being, I sort of was involved with Aboriginal health when they were here in Bankstown, and Kerry passed away. But I'm still on that committee, so anything where it brings up the Aboriginal, I sort of run with it. The same at the Western Sydney University. I make sure with the Bankstown campus here to make sure that our community is not missing out. From the veteran side thing, I make sure that our veterans or anybody that has an interest, as well as the other committees. And yous grabbed me here by the ear, and so there's plenty going on. I'm a member of the Gandangara Land Council, so there's things that happen there. There's I'll probably think of the other ones, the other committees, but that's how we all sort of interlink in our own way.
So this goes back to what you were saying about representation, and how important representation is around the table, around these different tables and committees and bodies and government bodies, and you've certainly done more than your fair share of being part of that representation.
Well, I'm worried about with the shirts that I've got. You might say to me, you're wearing the same shirt again.
Because you're turning up everywhere. Well, thank you so much, Uncle Harry, for being with us today and sharing your story. We learn so much from you every day, and hopefully the listeners have learnt about what what your story is, what your contribution is, and your beautiful nature and your very giving nature. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Anna and Rena. Thank you to you all. I didn't put you to sleep, that's the main thing.
Absolutely not.
And I've answered all the questions and the reams and reams of paper I've got. But anyway, that's the way it goes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But I'm interested to see what the end result is, what to put out. So the eyes will be upon you again then.
To check out more episodes of Voices of CBCity, more information, or our disclaimers, check out our website, cb.city/Voices of CBCity. The Voices of CBCity podcast is hosted by James Brown and Anna Certoma, produced by Renee Trainer and edited by the City of Canterbury Bankstown. This project is funded by the New South Wales Government through the New South Wales Social Cohesion Grants for Local Government and led by the City of Canterbury Bankstown.
To finish off Voices of CBCity today, we'll be featuring a different kind of voice of CBCity, students in the Unity program. The Unity program is facilitated by a local community youth arts organisation based in Bankstown named Out Loud. Unity is a project for girls and gender diverse young people under 12 years old. This program teaches singing and songwriting through the lens of healthy relationships, boundaries, consent and body neutrality. The girls then write, rehearse and perform their own song about what they think about these topics and how they want the world to be in the future. Unity provides young girls with the knowledge, skills and strength to healthily address key concerns, including healthy relationships, consent, body image, and bullying. There are some amazing songs that you can check out on Out Loud's YouTube channel, but for today, we hope you enjoy The Right to Have a Say by Banksia Road Public School.
Make sure you treat her with respect. Doesn't matter the outside to inside that counts. Hang with my friends is how we bounce. Care for one another no matter what. Love and friendship is what we got. Equality, treat everyone with respect, cause you never know what to expect. All I want in this world is harmony between men and women, you and me. Strong is being confident and healthy. It's important to never give up. Having love means that you're wealthy. I'll scream from the treetops above. We are strong and we don't wanna change. Being happy with yourself is the way. You need to be kind to your friends every day. We all have the right to have a say. Yay! Check up on a friend and say, are you okay? You never know what will happen someday. We're all perfect in our own way. We all deserve the right to have a say. A healthy relationship doesn't have fighting. Mistakes are always worth rewriting. Equality means that both have rights. Always show respect, day and night. You shouldn't be jealous of your friends. Stick together, let's make a trend. If I cry, that means I'm strong. Showing emotions is not wrong. Attention is what most people want, but with true respect you don't need to flaunt. Attention is what most people want, but with true respect you don't need to flaunt. We are strong and we don't want to change. Being happy with yourself is the way. You need to be kind to your friends every day. We all have the right to have a say. Yay!
Hi, I'm Amani.
And I'm Lilia.
And we're both in Year 6 at Banksia Road Public School.
This year, we did the Unity program at our school, which is run by Out Loud.
Out Loud is a community organisation that runs programs for young people, addressing social issues using arts and performance.
Each week in the Unity program, we learn all about healthy relationships and the importance of trust, safety and firm boundaries.
Then we all work together to write this song called The Right to Have a Say.
Good communication is key to having a healthy relationship. You should always feel safe to speak your mind because we all have a right to have a say. We hope you enjoyed our song.